The Buddha taught what has become known as the Dharma for many years, for about 40 years in his life. And he was asked a lot of questions in that time period, as you might guess. Many of the questions were questions around the ultimate meaning of life and what happens after you die, and is there a God, and so on and so forth. Philosophical, theological questions. And without exception, the Buddha would not answer. And he would say time and time again, I teach one thing and one thing only, and that is suffering and the end of suffering. And I've always thought that was curious. I can understand why one would teach about the end of suffering, but why teach suffering? Don't we know how to do that already? Now, I want to add that the word suffering in English is translated from the Sanskrit word dukkha, which really means discontent, dissatisfaction, unhappiness. So it's not simply suffering in the dramatic sense of the word, but it means any sense of discontent or unhappiness or being unfulfilled. But there again, why did he teach that? When I first studied Buddhism, I got as far as the First Noble Truth, and then I shut the book and said, I think I'll look for another religion, maybe Sufi or Taoism or something. The First Noble Truth being life is suffering, or life is dukkha. And I thought, well, the Buddha needed a publicist or a promotional person, because that's not a good way to sell a religion, is to start out by saying life is suffering, okay? You start out by saying, I can tell you how to end your suffering, but why that life is suffering is the First Noble Truth. Why not 3 Noble Truths instead of 4? Well, I found myself answering my own question, one time when I was in a discussion with some students at Unity Seminary, where I taught for many years. And the discussion was around the question of, is suffering necessary? So you might think about that question. If somebody asked you that question, what would you say? Yes, no, maybe, depends. So as we discussed and debated the pros and cons of yes or no or whatever, I found myself saying suffering is not necessary, but it takes quite a bit of suffering to realize that. Suffering is necessary to realize that it's not necessary. So it's a great paradox. In other words, suffering can be overcome, but only by going into it and through it. We cannot think our way out of it. We cannot bypass it intellectually, philosophically, or theologically, but we can dissolve it experientially. And that's what the Buddhist practice is about experience. When the Buddha taught the end of suffering, he could have said, I teach happiness and how to find happiness. Would have sold more books probably doing that. But he deliberately did not. Now, I can't say why. Nobody knows why, but I'll tell you my theory. And that is, anytime we use the word happiness, the mind, the ego, gets a hold of some concept of what happiness is. You know, if you're 6 years old, happiness is Disneyland or McDonald's or whatever you say. Happiness is different things to different people based on our own experiences, our own aspirations. The happiness that the Buddha taught goes beyond any concept and probably beyond the experience of the vast majority of human beings. So how do you teach something that no one has ever experienced? How do you describe the indescribable? Well, you can't, and he did not try. We hear the word Nirvana as the intention of Buddhist practice. Nirvana we may think of as bliss, joy, etc. But the word nirvana simply means to extinguish, to bring to an end the causes of suffering. So nirvana means simply no suffering, which really doesn't tell us much either, does it? But it's like the taste of a strawberry. Once you've tasted it, you know what it is, even though you may never be able to explain it or share that experience with another person verbally. Nirvana, or the absence of suffering, is the peace that goes beyond understanding, to use the words from one of the Gospels. One way that we can teach that which goes beyond words is to not try to explain what the end result is, if there is one, but simply to teach a method, to teach a practice, to teach a yoga, if you will. That's what yoga means, a discipline. So if someone were to ask the Buddha how to get to New York City, he would simply tell you, follow me. This is how I did it. You take one step at a time. He would not try to explain what it's going to be like when you get there. It may be different for each person. But the focus is on experience, not on philosophy and concepts. So, to experience freedom from suffering, we must explore and understand what suffering is, what the causes of suffering are. So I invite you to think about the last time you were suffering. For most of us, we don't have to go back too far. Maybe to breakfast, or maybe not even back that far. Waking up this morning. What is the essence of suffering? Well, you might say pain, but, dukkha, discontent, doesn't necessarily involve pain. We can be very, very comfortable and be unsatisfied and discontented. In fact, the vast majority of people in our country probably are comfortable and dissatisfied at the same time. What is it that is the core of suffering itself? Pain may be present, pain may not be present. But the essence of suffering is a sense of resistance to what's here right now. If you recall the last time you suffered, whether you were aware of it or not, you were probably saying, it shouldn't be this way. Right? Something's wrong. So suffering is about resisting our experience in the moment. Whether the experience is pleasant or unpleasant or neutral or whatever it is, when we can begin to see that suffering is not about the content of our experience, but about our response to, our reaction to our experience. Suffering is about saying no to our experience in this moment. Saying, this should not be happening. This is broken, this is wrong. So in other words, we're arguing with reality. We're arguing with what is. And that's what suffering is. I'm talking about our internal experience now. Our personal moment-by-moment experience. I'm not talking about the outer world. I'm not saying the outer world is perfect and we should leave it alone. Of course it's not. But in this moment, in your own personal internal experience, is there acceptance or resistance? And if there's any type of resistance, just notice what that feels like. Explore that. In the body, it may feel like tension. In the mind, it may feel like fear or anger or judgment. Emotionally, could be anger or contempt, hatred, anything that rejects this experience in the moment. Or it could be craving, could be wanting something else. This moment's not enough. There's something missing. So when there's suffering, we're saying either something's here that shouldn't be here, or something should be here that's not here. If I can notice the resistance, the craving, wanting what's not here, resisting what is here, rejecting what is here, if I can notice that and simply breathe, relax, and in effect, settle into this moment. This moment is okay. And the mind will jump in and say, no, it can't be okay. There's obviously something wrong. We come back to the breath. We come back to sensing the body. Just in this moment, breathing, relaxing as much as possible, opening the mind, opening the heart. And if we can, welcoming this moment. Most of the time, the mind is constantly saying, what's next? What's next? This moment is not enough. What's next? This moment is not satisfactory. What's next? And we can live 80, 90, 100 years looking at what's next. And we never live our life in the moment. That's dukkha. That's suffering. When we open up to our experience in this moment and allow it to be what it is, when we stop fighting with reality as we experience it in the moment, then the mind and the heart become clear. And if we need to take action, we'll know what we need to do. Accepting our experience in this very moment doesn't preclude taking action or making choices. It simply means we don't do it as a reaction, as a resistance to our present moment experience. So often our choices are driven out of the fact that this present moment feels unsatisfying. So I'm going to choose to do something else, hoping that the next moment will bring satisfaction. I can buy this, do this, go here, go there. And we live our lives, so many of us, just jumping. Like grasshoppers, if you will. Looking always for that next moment. Maybe this blade of grass will satisfy me. Well, this one doesn't, so maybe the next one will. Maybe the next one will. So as we settle into each moment and relax and open up, suffering will diminish. And then there's a moment of clarity. And then we can respond rather than react. Then we have free choice, free will. When we're reacting, we don't have free will. We're simply reacting. When we're clear, present, not caught up in suffering, then the mind and the heart have at least a modicum of clarity and awareness. And we can make choices that are wise and compassionate for ourselves and for others. And as you well know, our world is in dire need of wise choices and compassion at this time. So I invite you to join with me in contributing to the wisdom and the compassion of this planet one moment at a time.